Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Those of you both here in the room this fresh autumn morning, and those of you who are joining us online, my name is Gordon Flake. I'm the CEO of the Perth USAsia Centre, and we're delighted to be able to host this breakfast meeting this morning with the Shadow Minister for Trade and Shadow Minister for Industry, Madeleine King MP. Before we begin our proceedings, it's my great honor to introduce to you Ingrid Cummings. I think most of you know Ingrid. She's a Whadjuk Noongar woman from Fremantle, a graduate of Murdoch University. We have the Vice Chancellor of Murdoch University here with us today. Also a graduate of Melbourne Business School. And during her career has presented numerous articles and presentations internationally, including at the United Nations Women's Leadership Collective in Israel. She has spoken in representing Australian Indigenous business in the United States. There's a speaker at TEDx Perth 2014, and is internationally recognized for her work in leadership and her Indigenous knowledge, research, and cultural development. Her company is one that we benefit all tremendously from here, Kart Kurt Weirn, which has won and been a finalist for numerous awards here in Western Australia. But for the formal welcome to the country, please join me in welcoming Ingrid Cummings. Ingrid?
Kai Mama Yoga Yakoling Nita Mai Maya, Ingrid Cummings, I'm Whadjuk Noongar Yoga, Yaku Kopera Wearing Jenning Yira Ngang Nunawa, Jen Kopera Buja. Pretty good, eh? Good morning, everybody. On behalf of my elders and leaders past, present, and to the emerging leaders, it's lovely to be the representative of Whadjuk Noongar Nation to welcome you to country here today. Thank you very much for the very kind introduction. Impressed myself, listening about myself. I've done a bit, haven't I? So that being said, one of my greatest achievements is the ability to carry on very important cultural ceremony like Welcome to Country. So I thank those elders past, present, and emerging for that honour. North by Northwest, I actually have a good yarn that links to that. The connection across Noongar country is immense, but the connection of First Nations people across the state and indeed across the country is something that's also very important as well with our non-Indigenous brothers and sisters. I had the honour of being invited to Wadandi country, which is the Margaret River region, to perform at the World Surfing League. But we didn't just dance with Noongars. I was invited to lead ceremony on a place that wasn't necessarily my direct connection for the women, but we also had Ngamrala, which is from the Karratha area. We had Baramaya from the Port Hedland region. We had Yamaji. We had even people from the East Coast. Women come together and dance and celebrate ceremony led by Noongar people. It was very special. And the reason why I tell you this yarn is yes, Noongars are important, but so are the other First Nations people across our region and our Wadjala brothers and sisters. If it wasn't for the WSL, we couldn't have done something like that. And it was the first of its kind ever in the region. So obviously people coming together from different breadths of knowledge and industry and influence is a really important thing. So much like the gathering that you're having today. So I'm going to sing a song line for you. It comes from a place called Kalamara. Believe it or not, you mobs speak a lot of Noongar when you walk around the southwest region. Most of it is actually Noongar and you might not realise it. Kalamara, said with an Aussie accent, sounds a bit like Kalamunda. Any Kalamundians in the room? There's always one. Yep, see, there's always one. Kala meaning fire, Marda meaning ceremony. So Kalamara or Kalamunda has always been a place where many different people from Noongar Nation and other regions would come, meet, trade and do important business, because trade has been going on in this region for about 60,000 years. So I'm going to ask you to get your blood moving around your body just by clapping. That's it. Ma Barning Ma, they call it. I'm going to give you the beat. I'll sing the song. Join in if you know the words. $50 to anyone who can translate it. Are you ready? Kapida wirin, jararing iranuna, mamin yoga kulinga, nichan yunga puja, kupidan yunga puja, maya ngang butang, maya ngang briya, maya ngang kulinga, wanji nichan yunga puja. Oh, no one joined in. Never mind, next time. So that song in English is "Hello, old people and spirits of country. Look at these wonderful people, our friends, our colleagues that sit with us today, that join here to talk good business. May you look over at them and all of us as we go forward together here on beautiful Whadjuk Noongar Nation. Please look after us and care for us." So, and the reason why we shout and we clap is they can't hear us and see us if we don't. So it's the connecting with the song lines in country, going up to the wall of the sky and making sure that they know we're here, we know we come in good intent and we're doing good business together. So, ladies and gentlemen, Wanju Nitch Nyunga Buja, welcome to beautiful country. I hope you have a wonderful conversation and connection here at Brandalup, the place of pelicans, the place where lots of marriages and coming together of people have always occurred here in the Crawley Bay. And we wish you all the very best in your future endeavours and pathways. Thank you.
On a beautiful morning like today at the University Club, looking out over the Turbo Jurgen and the Swan River there, it seems that we should always have a requirement to have Ingrid be the one who delivers the welcome to the country. Her voice and her energy means that it probably should be renamed to a wake up to country, not a welcome to country, but we really appreciate her participation. Before I introduce our guest speaker today, allow me to acknowledge that we're joined this morning by the Vice Chancellor of the University, Professor Amit Chakma, the recently appointed Vice Chancellor of Murdoch University, Professor Andrew Deeks, the Consul General of Indonesia, Ibu Listi, Ms. Listiana Aparanata, who's the Indonesian Consul General here. Also, I think we'll be joined in a couple of minutes by Hannah Beasley, Member of Parliament here, as well as Peter Tinley. And we've got our colleagues from our corporate partners here, Chevron, Patrick Binden here as well. Thank you all for your support, for your time. I know there are many others joining us online as we go forward here. I should probably start out by acknowledging, looking at the age demographic in the room and some of those online, that many of you may have arrived this morning thinking that this was going to be a screening of the 1952 classic with Cary Grant called North by Northwest. There will not be a movie today, but I can promise you something better. We're very fortunate to have with us, the Shadow Minister for Trade, the Shadow Minister for Industry, the member for Brand, Madeleine King. I think Madeleine really needs no introduction in this room. This is home for her. We think of it as home. Brand, I think you all know, is a storied seat, position previously held by our current governor, Kim Beazley. Madeleine was elected in 2016, re-elected in 2019, and faces re-election again in just a couple of weeks. And so we're delighted during a very busy campaign season to hear her perspectives on trade, on her perspectives on regional engagement. Madeleine, prior to her current position, was a lawyer, I believe, in the Isles of Jersey Island, somewhere I've not been yet, but I have been regaled by tales and have great desires to go. Served as both a lawyer and then a chief of staff to the Vice Chancellor of the University of Western Australia. And from our parochial perspective, most importantly, was the founding chief operating officer of the Perth USAsia Centre. And so my first 2.5 years here in Western Australia were very much under Madeleine's tutelage. I refer to it as my political consigliere, my first ever visit to Question Time in Canberra. Every discussion of trying to understand Australian politics was really affected deeply by her perspective. And so we at the Perth USAsia Centre are delighted on behalf of UWA to welcome Madeleine home and look forward to your remarks today on North by Northwest, Australia's export future. Madeleine, over to you.
Thanks very much, Gordon. No, I can't promise you a movie of such magnitude as North by Northwest. I would like to start today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and I pay my sincere respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I'd like to thank Ingrid for her welcome. It's one of the great changes, I think, certainly in my own lifetime, where we have increasingly and consistently acknowledged the traditional owners of the land on which we meet. It's changed this country for the better, and I want to acknowledge Senator Pat Dodson as part of the Reconciliation Australia plan many years ago, who brought in the idea of acknowledging country and people into schools, and it's a really fantastic legacy of Senator Dodson and great for each and every one of us. We are today right beside the Derbil Yerrigan, the beautiful Swan River, which holds a sacred place in the Noongar culture and a special place in the hearts of all of us that call Perth home. I'd like to also acknowledge the distinguished guests here today. Listiana Opranata, the Consul General of the Republic of Indonesia, our great neighbour. Kirsty Packer, Head of Office at the British Consulate in Perth. My state parliamentary colleagues, who I believe will be here shortly, the Honourable Peter Tinley and Hannah Beasley. Former Labor Senator and Minister in the Rudd and Gillard governments, the Honourable Chris Evans. Professor Amit Shakma, the Vice-Chancellor here at the University of Western Australia, a place where I worked for many years. Professor Andrew Deeks, Vice-Chancellor of Murdoch University, of which my family, my husband's family in particular, has a very strong connection. And also Emeritus Professor Cheryl Prager, AC, who, in my very humble opinion, is undoubtedly Australia's preeminent mathematician, who is the recipient of the Prime Minister's Prize for Science in 2019 and one of the greats of the Australian academic and mathematics scene. So it's great to see you again, Cheryl. And also like to welcome all my friends and colleagues from industry, academia and the labour movement. It's great to be here at the University of Western Australia with the Perth USAsia Centre. Thanks, Gordon and the whole team for having me here. We had a great time together when I worked at the Perth USAsia Centre. And the Perth USAsia Centre is Western Australia's premier international relations think tank. In a nation whose foreign policy tends to be dominated from the view of Canberra, Sydney and Melbourne, the centre occupies a very important space in ensuring the view from the West is considered in national strategic conversations. It has led the way in the development of the Indo-Pacific concept and demonstrating the power of proximity that Western Australia holds with our neighbours to the north and northwest. I'm very proud to have been actively involved with the very first In the Zone conference held by UWA in 2009, and I know Tim Shanahan is here today. I was also very much involved in the development of that series. The In the Zone series opened a national conversation about our preeminent location, sharing the same time zone with 60% of the world's population. Here in our Indian Ocean capital, we're in a dynamic region made up of the nations which hold the greatest promise for economic growth in the 21st century. Before I was elected in 2016, it was my privilege to work on all of the In the Zone conferences at UWA and then to establish and help lead the Perth USAsia Centre in its first few years. Now, it's just short of 10 years ago since US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton visited WA and this campus alongside Kim Beazley and Stephen Smith and many others. His Excellency Kim Beazley is now our WA Governor, but then was Australia's ambassador to the US and, of course, was, as Gordon has said, previously one of my predecessors as a member for Brand. Stephen Smith, of course, the Minister of Defence at the time and remains a good friend. Secretary Clinton, Ambassador Beazley and Minister Smith announced the establishment of the Perth USAsia Centre during that visit. I'm very proud of what the centre has achieved in the intervening decade, and it has been an absolute delight to see this centre go from strength to strength. And it is a testament to the university's commitment to its enduring mission to advance the prosperity and welfare of the people of Western Australia that they continue to support the articulation of WA voices and perspectives in national debates, not only through their support of the Perth USAsia Centre, but also through the UWA Defence Institute and the UWA Public Policy Institute. In case you can't tell, and it's probably obvious, I'm a very proud alumna of UWA, both as a staff member and, of course, a former student way back when, a long time ago in the 90s. So thank you so much for having me here today. It is a place where I always feel at home when I'm here at Crawley on this beautiful campus. Friends, my two portfolios are trade and resources. There is, in my view, a great deal of complementarity between the two. The bulk of our resources are exported, and our resources exporters are the important ballast in our trading relationships. One of the important things that dual portfolios have afforded me is a much wider view of the economic opportunities currently facing our nation. We are at a turning point in the global economy, a period of flux and change. There are great risks, great challenges, and great shifts in how the world works and in how goods and services flow across international borders. Australia is facing a choice. Shape the future or be shaped by it. Anthony Albanese, our leader, and I have one mind. Australia must step confidently into the future and seize the opportunities that are presenting themselves now, right at this moment. To do that, we need to diversify both the products we export and the markets that we export to. Now, obviously, it'll be apparent to everyone here in this room that we're at the pointy end of an election campaign. And I know at least one person in the room is relatively new to Australian citizenship and is looking forward to participating in our great democratic process. And I hope that all others that may have participated like you in many elections as a voter, but also now as a candidate, will be as enthusiastic as our new citizens for the opportunity that an election provides. So as elections are all about politics and policy, I do hope you'll forgive me for getting a little bit political before I turn to policy. The COVID-19 global pandemic, supply chain volatility and Chinese trade sanctions have exposed the growing risks for Australian exporters, jobs and prosperity. Today, now in 2022, Australia's exports are more concentrated in one single market, China, than they ever have been. Despite their rhetoric, Scott Morrison and the Liberals have dropped the ball on trade diversification and have no plan to support Australian exporters and jobs that have been hit hard by recent trade sanctions. Australian wine and barley and lobster fishers and coal were all hit by Chinese sanctions. This economic coercion underlines that we should always seek to avoid over-reliance on any single market, to minimise the risks faced by Australian exporters and to safeguard the hundreds of thousands of jobs that depend on trade in this country. For the crayfishers, these sanctions hit really hard. Many lobster exporters have resorted to so-called grey export arrangements, which bring with them high risk and very diminished returns. Coal exporters too have had to apply workarounds. A combination of weather events in China and spiking global energy demands has left most coal exporters feeling a little more confident with the increasing price of that commodity. Barley exporters are producing premium malt grade grains have had to take stock feed prices for their harvest. Alternative markets have been found, but they are not paying the same prices, and many farmers have since made the decision to plant different crops. And we wait to see the effects on global grain prices and trade flows as Ukraine, because of the Russian invasion, looks unable to have a grain crop this European season. After decades of effort in developing the market, Australian wine exporters have once again had to put their shoulder to the wheel to redirect China-bound products to other markets. The most promising has been the UK wine market, and the recently signed Australia-UK Free Trade Agreement will lower tariffs on Australian wines sold there, although it'll be about a 10-year wait for that to come through. But there is a bit of a sting in that tail. While tariffs are lowered for Australian wine exporters in that FTA, the UK government looks set to increase domestic taxes on wines. This will have a disproportionate effect on Australian wines, as it is a tax charged by alcohol percentage. In case you did not know, Australian wines are naturally higher in alcohol than European wines, and that is because of our sunnier and drier climate. For that, we can be grateful. But that will put Australian wines at a competitive disadvantage to European wines in that UK market. And this has happened a mere months after the UK-Australia FTA was signed. More than 1/3 of Australian wine exports are sold to the UK, now making it Australia's #1 export market following the China trade sanctions. And if implemented, these duty changes will mean a debilitating 11% tax increase on Australian wine exports to the UK. In Senate estimates hearings last year, it was revealed that the Australian government negotiators knew that this was a very real prospect that was about to happen in Britain at least a month before the trade agreement was signed. But nonetheless, for this government, it was full steam ahead, despite being aware that new domestic tax system will hurt Australian wine growers significantly more than the tariff reduction in the agreement would help. So just like everything else Scott Morrison does, signing the UK free trade deal was more about seeking to do something more than the actual outcome. Sadly, the same, it seems, goes for the Indonesia-Australia Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement. ICEPA was signed just 3 years ago, and since then there's been mostly gathering dust. There has been very little effort made by the Morrison government in developing our trading relationship with our nearest neighbour. It's as though they have a blind spot when it comes to our near abroad, something we don't have here in Perth. We know how important Jakarta and Indonesia is to our future. One of my Labor predecessors in the trade portfolio, Stephen Smith, used to talk about the fact that everyone saw the rise of China, but too few appreciated the rise of India, of Indonesia, and the ASEAN economies combined. Indonesia is set to be the fourth largest economy in the world behind the US, China, and India within 2 decades. ICEPA is a great foundation, but the fact that the relationship has languished since is both cynical and also stupid, and frankly unforgivable. The Liberals' approach to international trading relationships is set and forget, all about the photo opportunity at the trade deal signing ceremony, but they have failed to do the hard work of the follow-up. The follow-up to the signing ceremony is the implementation of the agreement itself, making it actually work for exporting businesses. And this is where the hard graft of international trade lies. The fact is, Scott Morrison and his government like to talk a big game on trade diversification, but the record is one of abject failure. And never has the economy needed an energetic approach to trade policy more than now. Economic coercion is not the only trade challenge Australia faces. The COVID-19 global pandemic hit global supply chains hard, and we are now in the 3rd year of acute constraints in international logistics. The reduction in passenger air travel since the start of the pandemic caused real problems with trade and perishable goods such as fresh food and cut flowers. But sea and surface logistics too are severely constrained. Domestically in recent months, COVID absences from work slowed down the movement of goods and led to shortages of basic goods from supermarket shelves. A flood in South Australia cut the main freight line between WA and the eastern states for more than 2 weeks. But even before the pandemic and the flood, Australia's had a shortage of truck drivers. The importance of the road freight industry and the truck drivers themselves are outrageously underestimated in this country. We become more aware of our fragile supply chains during a crisis, but any truckie will tell you there is generational challenges facing the industry and therefore each of us. Internationally, there are shortages of shipping containers, ships and mariners to crew them. The international shipping squeeze means firms can no longer rely on just-in-time supply chain models, so more goods are being warehoused for longer, causing a shortage of warehouse spaces in many ports. Ports are straining to work through the backlogs, and we haven't got to the flow-on effects of the Ever Given when it was stuck, wedged as it was in the Suez Canal. It's a mess. Each element of constraint will have a different time frame for correction, and each delay, each additional day at sea, each additional day in a warehouse adds to the costs of goods to consumers. Meanwhile, Russia's invasion of Ukraine has also had a dramatic impact on the global movement of goods. Energy prices have spiked. This is part due to changes in supply of Russian gas to Europe and movements in Europe to use alternative energy sources, including coal and LNG. For the most part, Australia's energy exports are contracted many years in advance, as people in this room would know. But the flow-on effects of the invasion are global in their reach and are now impacting Australia's import of LNG and coal to North Asia. Similarly, the price of other relevant commodities linked with Russia and Ukraine, including wheat and corn, will have an impact on food prices and food security, particularly in the Middle East. So there's a bit going on. Opportunities and challenges, but we are ready and raring to go, ready to seize the opportunities and face the challenges head on. Facing these challenges will require national effort, to not only secure new markets for our exports, but a transformative domestic economic agenda, an agenda which enables Australia to produce different goods and services to export to the world. On Sunday, Labor launched our campaign here in Perth, the first time any major party has launched its campaign here since the Second World War. Unfortunately, I was isolating with COVID, so I was very sorry to miss that big moment. but I guess I got out of putting makeup on and getting up early. So anyway, I did watch the live stream. At the launch, Anthony Albanese announced a new $1 billion value adding in resources fund to support new resources processing projects in Australia. Australia's resources and energy export earnings are expected to reach a record $425 billion in 21-22. Our traditional mining industry has delivered prosperity to the nation and jobs and livelihoods for Australians all over the nation. Currently, most of these resources are processed further overseas. This fund will help us process Australia's mineral resources in Australia, capturing more value for our economy and creating jobs here. The extraordinary global demand for Australia's rare earths and critical minerals presents an unmissable opportunity to develop a new resources industry alongside our traditional base and expand our mining, science, technology capabilities. Well, you would think it is an unmissable opportunity, but the truth is we have missed opportunities like this before. In the midst of World War II, critical minerals were in demand for different reasons than they are today. Tantalum and beryllium were strategic minerals in the US in the early 1940s, and in 2022 they remain so. As it happened, Lady Deborah Vernon Hackett, the wife and widow of this institution's great benefactor Sir John Winthrop Hackett, owned the Wodgina mine in the Pilbara, which had a global monopoly on the extraction of high-grade tantalite for the production of tantalum and the very light, extraordinarily hard mineral ore, beryl, that could be transformed into highly desirable beryllium. For many years, Lady Hackett had sought investment from London to develop a processing facility for these rare earths in Welshpool, and before investment was forthcoming, however, the times overtook her. Instead of processing these minerals here, 18 tonnes were airlifted from the Pilbara to the US, and in the US, this Western Australian ore produced the entire requirements of the Allied nations for refined tantalum. Later in 1942, beryl from the Wodgina mine was shipped from the Pilbara to New York, but only in 70-tonne lots in case the shipment was attacked on its voyage. It was a vital dread cargo required for Allied armaments, and they had to ensure the entire stockpile would not be lost. The circumstances of the 1940s and the story of the Wodgina mine are clearly very different to the circumstances of the critical minerals industry today. But the strategic imperative of critical minerals remains. Like Lady Hackett, we hope for the advanced processing of critical minerals, processing that spins dirt into high-value products, to take place here in Australia. We know this will require international economic partnerships and strong investment of financial and intellectual capital into Australia. The story of the Wodgina mine is a salutary lesson. If we don't grab opportunities, they can be lost easily as circumstances become urgent and geostrategic issues press hard. The role of governments in this sector will be very important, and there is no time to waste. Labor's $1 billion value adding and resources fund will ensure we grasp hold of those opportunities ahead with both hands. This fund is part of the $15 billion National Reconstruction Fund, designed to create secure jobs for Australian workers, drive regional economic development, boost our sovereign capabilities, and diversify the nation's economy. We need our economy to be more complex in what it produces for export, and therefore more resilient and better prepared to face the challenges of the future. And we've already announced a suite of policies to augment this economic transformation. Our Future Made in Australia plan will support an economic transition to use the levers of government to support local industrial development. And the associated skills package, including 465,000 fee-free TAFE places for in-demand skills, will ensure Australian workers are able to take their place with the jobs of the future. Labor's Powering Australia policy sets out a clear pathway to reduce our nation's carbon emissions by 43% by 2030 and to net zero by 2050. No longer will Australia be a pariah at climate change summits around the world. Under the plan, Labor will protect the competitiveness of emissions-intensive trade-exposed industries by ensuring they will not face greater constraints than their competitors overseas. We will allocate up to $3 billion from Labor's National Reconstruction Fund to invest in green metals such as steel, alumina and aluminium, clean energy component manufacturing, hydrogen electrolysers and fuel switching, agricultural methane reduction, and also waste reduction. An Albanese Labor government will provide direct financial support for measures that improve energy efficiency within existing industries and develop new industries in regional Australia through a Powering the Regions Fund. These combined are not a small target strategy. Labor has a big vision for a better future. The vision is for Australians to make more things here and to sell them to the world. This requires a national effort to not only secure new markets for our exports, but a transformative domestic economic agenda which enables Australia to produce goods and services to export to the world that are markedly different to what we produce today. Only Labor has a clear plan to diversify both the products Australia exports and the nations we export to, and Albanese Labor government will reconnect Australia to its region and do the work needed to get our trading relationships back on track. And so I'm very pleased this morning to announce today Labor's trade diversification plan. This plan has 4 main pillars. The first pillar is an export market and product diversification strategy, which will involve a whole-of-government approach to reinvigorate our engagement with the emerging markets of the Indo-Pacific and identifying emerging areas of potential Australian export strength, such as digital health and financial services, just by way of example. This strategy includes early ministerial visits to Indonesia, to India, to Japan, Korea, Malaysia, Singapore, and Vietnam. We'll be very busy. Government must be able to work better internally to manage our trade relations. So an Albanese Labor government will establish a cross-sectoral Trade 2040 task force, bringing together all relevant agencies, industry and exports, and reporting to key ministers. The Trade 2040 task force will seek to identify areas of Australian strength that are currently underdeveloped for export markets and develop strategies for maximising export potential. A focus of the task force will be to determine how to unlock Australia's services sector for greater export opportunities. With many of our trading partners, of course, education is an excellent starting point. A whole-of-government approach to trade diversifications means it's the job of every minister in the government to look in their portfolios and ask themselves, what can I do to help diversify the exports of Australia? What can the industry I represent as minister bring to the world? If a government takes this approach to trade diversification, we open up possibilities beyond the traditional and very important resources and agricultural sector to areas of great Australian capabilities such as health services, digital services, financial services for funds under management, science, research and innovation, advanced manufacturing and robotics. And while resources experts will remain the backbone of the economy for many, many years, opening up the non-resources sector opportunities and building greater service sector engagement with Asia could add up to $275 billion to the Australian economy. This is an opportunity Australia simply cannot pass up. A future Labor government will not let Australia miss this chance. We will also institute a ministerial-level technical barriers to trade working group with an initial focus on resolving biosecurity barriers for Australian exports. Often, work to resolve technical barriers either falls into the gaps between government departments or gets put into the too hard basket. Did you know that it's possible to export avocados from WA to Japan, but not from Queensland or New South Wales? We should really fix that. Labor knows that sometimes it takes the minister to work with her colleagues to resolve issues that the department alone cannot fix. Labor will not shirk that ministerial responsibility. Labor will also conduct an internal urgent review of the export market development grants. The government's recent changes to the EMDG has made a formerly very successful grant program increasingly unpredictable and, from many reports, utterly unusable for emerging exporters. We are committed to engaging meaningfully with exporters to make that system work again. The second pillar of our policy is a renewed focus on building economic ties with India. India is a democracy of 1.5 billion people just across the Indian Ocean from Perth. We would be foolish not to prioritise the development of a trading relationship with this vital market. Labor in government will, of course, continue to work on the trade cooperation. We saw the early harvest agreement signed just before the election was called, and I was really pleased to meet with the Indian Trade Minister Goyal during his visit to Perth in April. That said, in opposition, we have limited visibility of the state of negotiations between the government and our government and the Indian government. Nevertheless, Labor is committed to commissioning a post-pandemic update of the very impressive 2018 India Economic Strategy conducted by Peter Varghese. Labor will also seek to institute an annual India-Australia economic dialogue between each nation's Trade Minister and Treasurer. And a key missing piece of the relationship with India is limited India literacy in the business community, but from a language and cultural point of view. An Albanese Labor government will create a pilot in-country Indian language study program modelled on the very successful Australian Consortium of In-Country Indonesian Studies, ACICIS. That's based here at UWA, and I acknowledge the consortium director, Liam Prince, who I believe is in the audience today. And I would note, actually, that ACICIS nearly collapsed due to the neglect of the current Liberal government, who had to be dragged to assist this very successful 28-year-old program through the extraordinary challenges of COVID-19. Labor will also work with industry to develop an Industry India Literacy and Capability program using best practice principles to upskill Australian businesses. The third pillar of our plan is to revitalise our trade relationship with Indonesia, following the Liberals' neglect since signing the ICHEPA. An Albanese Labor government will also seek to establish an economic 2+2 ministerial dialogue with Indonesia. The annual economic ministerial dialogue will be augmented by a +1 set of ministers from each side, changing each year depending on discussion priorities. For example, we might include infrastructure ministers one year to bring Australian expertise to the grand challenge of building the new Indonesian capital of Nusantara in East Kalimantan and the province and the island of Borneo. A remarkable vision, and one Australia and Indonesia can work on together. Similarly, dialogue between our respective health ministers is also vitally important so that we can work together on bringing Australia's expertise in digital health services across its rural and remote areas to the challenging geography of Indonesia and its thousands of islands. Labor in government will activate the joint Australian-Indonesian Trade and Goods, Trade and Services, Investment and Economic Cooperation Committees in Chapter 18 of the ICHEPA, but on which the Liberal government has so far taken absolutely no action. I would also like to raise the profile of the ICHEPA Catalyst Economic Cooperation Program to reboot people-to-people and business-to-business links post-COVID. Importantly, Labor will continue its support of the ACICIS program to enhance Indonesian literacy amongst Australian students. This is a program vital for our people-to-people relationships with our nearest and very important neighbour. Finally, the fourth pillar of Labor's trade diversification plan seeks to include our trading partners in multilateral economic fora. In the face of rising economic coercion, we must work to strengthen the global rules-based system and hold countries that break these rules to account. More than ever, we need effective and inclusive multinational fora to enable nations to come together in the good times and the bad. In that context, it is important for Australia to engage fully within the rich tapestry of regional architecture in the Indo-Pacific. Australia has acceded to the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which I've previously described as an ambitious ASEAN and Friends treaty organisation. And Australia worked with other regional partners, and in particular Japan, to establish the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership after the original TPP stalled. The United States' new Indo-Pacific Economic Framework Initiative has been welcomed as a mechanism by which the US can meaningfully re-engage with our region. The Indo-Pacific Economics Framework's values-based approach has identified a free and open, connected, prosperous, secure and resilient Indo-Pacific as the guiding principles which our values Labor can most certainly agree with. To that end, Labor will support the accession of Indonesia, Thailand and Korea to the CPTPP. We will work to cooperate with the US on the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework and encourage their participation in other regional fora such as the CPTPP, and Labor will also support India's membership of APEC and RCEP if they wish to join. Friends, in just over 2 weeks, Australia will choose a future. Australians have a real choice between a worldview that faces the future with confidence or one that cowers from the world in fear. I want to be part of an Australia that seeks to act upon our world and not merely react to it. I want to be part of an Australia that plays to its strengths rather than blaming others for its weaknesses. I want to be part of an Australia that seizes opportunities as they present themselves, not ones that tries to resist the inevitability of change. And I want to be part of an Australia that values and invests in its relationships with its neighbours, both near and far. Labor wants to build a better future for all Australians, and don't you? Thank you all very much for your attention today.
Well, thank you very much, Madeleine. I appreciate that. Have I got my mic on? We're going? Oops. I think we're good there. As you know, just returned from 3 weeks in the United States. And in the United States, despite the fact that we're a year and a half into the Biden administration, trade remains a bit of a dirty word. Very, very sensitive. You referred to the United States Indo-Pacific Economic Framework and their principles, but the one word missing from that was trade. And yet you, in the middle of an election campaign, came out and laid out a very detailed kind of 4-point, trade diversification strategy. So I'm just kind of wondering if I might ask you to start off in a world where multilateralism in some ways been in retreat for the last 4 or 5 years, where the U.S. is hesitant to address trade, and yet Australia has, as you mentioned, pursued most recently an interim strategy with India. We have the IA-CEPA, the CPTPP. What is it about Australia's approach to trade that even the shadow minister from the Labor Party can make such a full-throated defense of and vision for international trade and diversification?
Thanks, Gordon. Well, Australia depends on trade, and ever since, and Ingrid earlier mentioned that trade's been going on between the Indonesian and Aboriginal Australia, for tens of thousands of years. But then since white settlement, we have absolutely depended on it, whether it started with exports of coal, but now more so iron ore and gas. But it is reported that 1 in 5 jobs in this country depend on trade. So if you've got a fifth of the working population involved in a trade-related industry, then your priority always has to be on being an open economy. We had to transform our economy, and that happened under Hawke and Keating to make sure we were open, and we dropped the tariff walls. And that led to greater prosperity for Australians. They were able to buy cheaper things as we stopped protecting some of our industries that were less productive and, quite frankly, quite expensive. And then flipped that, and that we were able to sell more things. And this is a really important part of our economy. It's the mainstay of our economy, trade, whether it be iron ore, gas, coal, but also the higher education sector, which obviously suffered under COVID but will recover, and increasingly more services sector. So we can do it because we have to do it, is the truth of the matter. The US has such a larger internal market. It can, not for all time, but for some time it can probably depend on that. It's not its great tradition, and I think, in my humble opinion, I think the US would do well to think more about being an open trading nation again. The bilaterals that happen the deals between the US and China serve no one else but the US and China. And, Australia suffered because of those deals, and that's why regional agreements, multilateral agreements are much more progressive and more helpful for international trade than bilateral deals such as that.
Well, I think you will find that your remarks will be well received in Washington among those who are committed to the U.S. having a much more active presence in this region, the Indo-Pacific in particular. You referenced the values-based approach of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, which is certainly a good start. But the fact that it doesn't even mention trade gives you an indication of where it's to go. And so the notion that Australia, together with countries which traditionally were not seen as leaders on free trade, which have become that, Japan,
absolutely,
et cetera, indicate that there's probably a market for them and other countries that may join the CPTPP. I was encouraged by your remarks about a potential Korea, Thailand, Indonesia joining the CPTPP, because that then provides a useful incentive for the United States to reevaluate its approach to our region. So.
Yeah, and it's vitally important that Australia participates in creating the rules of the road, so to speak. The international system of trade, because we depend on trade, we want to be part of building those rules that we hope all nations abide by, and that's why we're played an important role in the development of the World Trade Organisation, the development of the Cairns Group in relation to progressing tariff-free agricultural trade in the WTO, and remaining part of the TPP was vitally important because if not us, then who? So we need to participate. And the Regional Comprehensive and Economic Partnership, I mean, that's not as ambitious as some agreements, but it's still a very important piece of regional architecture that brings more countries in to a similar way of thinking on open trade. And if you're not on the train, you miss out, and you're sort of not taking your proper role. And for a country that depends on trading with other nations, and if once upon a time we depended on the UK for all our trade, and I know it's really good we've got a UK FTA, but nothing can replace the potential of Indonesia and India for a state and a country that, I mean, look, the proximity, these maps tell you everything you need to know. These are the countries it makes sense to trade with.
You referenced several times just now the rules-based order, or the rules according to that. We've had a bit of a rough patch for the last 2 years, as many Australian businesses have been on the receiving end of economic coercive. Obviously here in WA, you referenced already rock lobsters and wine and barley, of course, right? I'm curious as to your view as to what Australia might be able to do to strengthen that rules-based order, those institution stuff, so as to be able to help defend against or avoid future kind of extra judicial or extra rules-based order coercive activities such as we've seen in recent years.
Yeah, well, some of the coercive activity there is close to nothing you can do. If another nation sets its determined pathway to make those sanctions, it does become very difficult for the Australian government of the day to deal with that or change that path. Nonetheless, communications should always remain as open as possible. But I accept with a great trading partner that is China, that has most definitely changed, and that's a leadership issue in China has, for the most part, been the cause of that, and will be of great concern to this nation for many years to come. And we obviously look forward to the day when that might be go into shinier pastures. But in the meantime, Australia has to be very solid in its views and hold on to its values, and that we do, and we support the government, its approach to China. In the meantime, some of these disputes are going to the World Trade Organisation, and that's really important. The World Trade Organisation hasn't been supported by its once great supporters. The appellate system is still broken, and we've had a change of government in the US, and that government hasn't fixed that yet or done much to do it, and I'm not sure what legs are swimming under the water to fix it, but the evidence shows we're not repairing the trouble with the WTO. So I think for Australia's part, we just have to be kind of outrageously active in as many forums as we can be, and always talking of the benefits of open trade, because without it, it's obviously no good for us, but it's also no good for the region. Peace and prosperity go together, is the truth of it. And, prosperity comes with trade and interlinking of economies and helping others out when you can, and people wanting the things you have and you want the things they have. And that causes builds a greater trust, which can lead to ongoing peace, and that's what we want. And so I think that the louder we speak in these forums about holding to the rules and encouraging others to join us and be part of that system is only going to be a positive. But it's hard work and it takes a long time. Like, I'm not saying you can change these things overnight or meet these challenges easily, most certainly not. But you can certainly be enthusiastic and take a leadership role. And, I take my hat off to Japan when that government decided, no, we're not going to let the TPP go because America decided to make it part of their election. They took it up and Australia joined with them, and I think that was a really positive thing.
I love your framing of that as outrageously active.
Yeah.
There should be a bumper sticker, outrageously active in terms of that process.
Jeff Wilson would love that.
Yeah. Hey, we, as an institution, and this goes back to your time at the Centre, have kind of had an institutional mantra, which we probably should put in a bumper sticker as well, which is diversify, diversify, diversify. But as you pointed out in your speech, in the 8 years plus now nearly 9 years that the Centre has been operating, the Australian economy has become less diversified.
Yeah.
And so that's a real challenge. You did highlight it, and you did give us a 4-point kind of 4-pillar strategy. But I wonder if I might get you to kind of focus on, from your view, what are the priority countries for Australia to focus on in terms of project diversification? If we truly are to make a meaningful move in that way, who will we do it with?
Indonesia is our greatest starting point. And it took a lot of effort to get the ICHEPA agreed. It was these things are challenging for many countries for many internal political reasons, and signing the India-Australia Comprehensive Economic Partnership was a really very positive step. And I think we need to build on that step. I mean, Gordon, you were here when we had the 6th president of Indonesia here at SPY. I mean, what a remarkable occasion that was. And our relationships with Indonesia historically have been very important. When I worked for the Vice-Chancellor, Alan Robson, we had the serving Vice President of Indonesia visit. And that's because he had been a Colombo Plan student in the 60s. It's the remarkable relationships we had built through our education system over many years, and we want to be able to keep replicating that. And I acknowledge the new Colombo Plan is playing a part, but I think we need to make the relationships and the time people can spend, the time they can spend after they've finished studying in Australia, go on longer and be more deep, so to speak. So the fondness and trust is built up, and what a teacher does is remarkable, and has been doing for many years, encouraging Australian students to, get a bit out of their comfort zone and go and live and study in Jakarta. That's a very important activity, and long may it continue. And I'll always be fighting for more funding for our teachers and our new program we want to do in India, but. It's about what product. Not every country is going to want the same thing, right? So we know China buys our iron ore, and that will continue for a long time, and other countries buy our coal, but that's not the same for Indonesia or India. So what do they want to buy from us? And it's in the main services-based products. It's education or health services, financial services, even interest from Japan, which is traditionally a nation of savers in our superannuation industry, because we're experts. $1 trillion of fund under management that we've an industry we've created. Like, this is a sort of sectorial specific, country specific trade potential that we should, embark on. And we already have an excellent trading relationship with Japan and investment as well, I might add. So Indonesia won, India's pretty much won too, but it's a more challenging environment to trade with. But the agreement we've just reached is a really positive thing, and I do take my hat off to the Minister Dan Tehan, in reaching that. But I think there's a long way to go with India. They also have an extraordinarily large internal market, and as an agricultural nation as well, the challenges in trading in agriculture are really challenging for India. But they're certainly the two priorities.
I want to make sure I give a chance for the audience to ask a couple of questions. We're running quickly out of time, but I did want to bring in your other portfolio. You're Shadow Minister for Trade, but also Shadow Minister for Resources. And I love the story you told about Miss Hackett and the tantalum mine. one of the areas that this state is, and the country is looking at more broadly as we think about diversification, is obviously critical materials, rare earths, all those things that are kind of future-based industries. I wonder where you think the real potential is for project diversification in tying your two portfolios together.
Yeah, sure. The Wodgina mine story is fascinating. Wouldn't be no surprise to anyone that it was Gary Gray that brought this to me, the former member for Brown and now ambassador to Ireland. But and the Wodgina mine now is owned by Mineral Resources and is producing lithium, and which had been it had gone into care and maintenance for some time, but as prices have changed and urgencies have changed, that's now full steam ahead for MinRes. But what's the potential for us? We need to add more value here. And critical minerals and rare earths are a low volume prospect, quite unlike coal and iron ore. So there is more potential for us to do it. But what do we need to be able to do it? We've got the Future Batteries Industry CRC, which is doing great work in proofing up concepts of how you move further along that value chain, and other companies as well that I've visited recently with other shadow ministers. What we need is capital investment from other countries and also intellectual investment. So we know the makers of batteries, we don't need to reinvent wheels that have been invented in South Korea or Japan. We should bring them here though and say, how about you make the wheels here, the anodes and the cathodes that form that highest sort of part of that value add that you can make here. And maybe we make batteries in the end, but you've got to move along the pathway, that's for sure. You don't have to do it all at once, but you've certainly got to make a step, and you've got to not throw it in a plane and ship it all out. You need government investment to try and provide the incentive to bring international investment here to build these facilities to make these things that we then sell. And it creates a secure supply chain for our trusted partners, being the US and, of course, those in Korea and Japan and Indonesia and elsewhere. So that's the bonus for those nations, is that we can be a trusted partner and a secure partner, a pretty safe partner, very stable government. I know we're in an election, but no matter who wins, it's still a stable environment. This is our challenge, and this is what we've got to do. I feel like we've been talking about it for a long time. And, I first raised that Wodgina story in the 2017 in the Zone conference. So, and things are happening, and the work Linus is doing out at Kalgoorlie is remarkable. And but we're just getting these next steps is really, it's got to be a solid commitment to build something that builds something, if you know what I mean. So.
Now, look, we're almost at time, but I did want to get maybe one or two quick questions from the audience with short responses. And so this gentleman up here at the front, we've got a microphone coming to you real quick. And just briefly reintroduce yourself, and that's good.
I'm president of the Zhonghua Association, a 111-year-old association. So my question is, just now we're talking about the diversity of the international market. For me, it's strongly dependent on the business opportunities. The seller can sell the price with profit. The buyer only have to pay the price they can buy. Okay. You said about you are looking for Indonesia as as first opportunity for the diverse market. And then even you don't know what is the industry you're talking about, you say health services and education services, not iron ore and coal, because coal is made in Indonesia too. My question is, China is our biggest trade partner. Because of China buy iron ore to make WA have $5 billion more than profit last financial year. If you are elected, will you start to fix the Australian and China trade relationship? I think this is more imminent and also is more quick way to fix our economic problem. Again, if this is fixed, we say the wine, barley, where is the labor come from?
Yep.
Because currently very, very low unemployment rate. This is my two questions.
So I'm going to let you come to that question, and I want to take one more final question before we then give you a chance to wrap them up. This gentleman right here in the middle, right here, James right here. We have the being broadcast on video, so we want to make sure they can pick it up as well.
Thank you. I'm a retired public servant, and you talked about trade and all the opportunities we got and the history of Wandjina, the importance of truck drivers and the movement. We've got no domestic refining capability.
Yeah.
It's a great vulnerability. No one's talking about it.
Okay,
Well, someone from
Kwinana, born in
will know a
Kwinana,
lot
so-
about so China relationship and
Yeah.
then domestic refining. We'll let you handle those last two.
Absolutely. There's no doubt about it. China is our number one trading partner and will hopefully remain so for some time. The change in the relationship is a staggering change, to be honest. It's, I think, only 7 years ago that Chapter the Chinese-Australia Free Trade Agreement was signed, and Xi Jinping spoke in our parliament to a joint sitting in the House of Representatives. I think I've got that timing right, but that's pretty recent. And for that relationship to have gone from those giddy heights, and Xi Jinping's visited this campus, well, not when he was president, but in another capacity. Very important visit. He's visited every state in Australia. The Chinese leader knows this country probably better than many leaders of many countries, to be honest. So it is, a bit staggering that this is what we've come to, and I'm not happy about it, but I accept that it's not, certainly not within my control, but it's also outside of the current Australian government's control for the most part. This is a change that's happened in the posture of China itself, and Australia is the nation they have sought to put these sanctions on, and on no one else. So what can we do but withstand? We do have to hold true to the values and support open trade, and we hope something does change. The opportunity for change does come, but nonetheless, we have to be very clear-minded about our security interests in this country. What I do know is that the ballast in the relationship will be those companies that trade every single day and have continued to. And I talk of the iron ore companies and the coal companies. In the red wine industry, that took a lot of effort to build that industry up and that trading relationship. It was a good one. I fear now that after 20 years of effort, that will probably be very hard to rejuvenate. It's just really hard. Same with the crayfishing issue, and probably with the barley as well. This is a decision of China's. I think in the last election there was a lot of rhetoric that wasn't helpful for the relationship. We don't see it as much now, but I do note there is a few billboards and trucks going around the country that are not really helpful, and quite frankly a little bit, well, actually not a little bit racist, a lot racist. So I hope that stops, and I hope that goes some way to repairing the relationship. But for the most part, we wait for China to change some of its approach to Australia, and that's what we will have to do. In relation to the refining capability, it's, again, another staggering development. There were 4 refineries in this country about 2 years ago, and now there are only 2. BP Kwinana was the catalyst for the development of the Kwinana industrial area, from the dredging of the channel, which had to happen for the ships to come in to even build the place. It created the towns of Medina and Callista. I was born in Callista, sorry. My sister was born in Medina. But my dad came to Australia to work at BP. This is part of our story. What's there's so many disappointing things about it. They were very good, well-paid jobs where people didn't have to fly in, fly out. They did their shift work and had this refining capacity on our doorstep, which had been there since 1956. The government put in a lot of money, but they put it in too late for BP. They've now, one of the biggest challenges BP faced was changing their particulate mix and making it a cleaner fuel, so to speak. They've been warning about this for years, that it would be very hard for them to do, yet the government did nothing. Then they lost the 2 refineries because they couldn't support it anymore, and then they put money into the exact same problem. So, the East Coast's fine. The East Coast they're going to have their 2 refineries, but the fuel security strategy at the moment in this country is to have refined fuel come from the north, from Singapore, which is great in good times, and fill up empty tanks that they're building fuel tank farms everywhere, and BP will use theirs. And that will be refined crude oil, which only lasts, I think, 90 days. Crude oil, when it's unrefined, lasts forever. So you can have a stockpile forever. And if you've got the capacity to refine it, therefore you've got the capacity to have refined fuel. We don't have that anymore. It's a national disgrace. It's a national disgrace. And we've put ourselves in it.
I have done a poor job of managing the clock. We're a little bit over time. I realize that we've got people watching us online as well, but we really appreciate your time and your insights. I wish we could have many more questions to go. I would note from this stage, we have for many years now focused on security issues. A couple of years ago, we had the Defense the Strategic Update 2020 announced from this stage, and it was actually, I think, the Vice Chancellor's first day on the job, as it works out. And in that context, we often talk about Australia's northern and western approaches. And that's a very security-centric, threat-based kind of view of the world. It was really refreshing today to have this north by northwest kind of approach that is really opportunity-based, economic engagement-based. And it's heartening to have a shadow trade minister be able to articulate that so well. So you have been outrageously active and outrageously informative today. Please, all of you, join me in thanking the Shadow Minister for Trade and for Resources, Madeleine King.
Thank you. Thanks, Gordon.